And for most, it's too late. I mean, China's just too big. They could absorb all of the world's willing migrants, assuming the migrants wanted to go there, and it wouldn't be enough to move the needle. Canada is a very special case. Their percentage of foreign-born is triple that of the countries in second place, and it's a tie between us and Australia and New Zealand and Argentina, where we're all at right around 3%, whereas the Canadians are at about 10.
When you're traveling around talking to people, so many people just are just fundamentally closed off to the idea that China might be as weak as you say. I mean, we have certainly hear voices that are convinced that they're an existential threat to the US. Where is the divide? Why are you so sure that China is so weakened and others are so sure they're going to invade Taiwan and be a threat to the US?
Well, there's always the linear forecast fallacy. The idea is that the last 20 years had this percentage of growth, so the next 20 years will be that percentage of growth. I mean, by that logic, we're all going to be Nigerian by the year 2150. That's number one. Number two, there's a lack of understanding of the degree to which China is a technological power. And even for semiconductors, and forget the high-end stuff, which the Chinese can't even pretend to make. Like the low-end stuff between like 70 and 90 nanometer, things are just like barely a step over the Internet of Things. Yes, the Chinese make a lot of those, but with imported equipment and imported software and imported labor, the skill sets of the Chinese just have not improved much. Labor costs have gone up by a factor of 14 in the last 22 years, but worker productivity has barely doubled. So China is no longer the low-cost producer, and they were never able to become the high-tech producer. They do low-end, they do assembly. That is not nothing. That is an essential piece of the process, but it's not a dominant part of the process, and that is the easiest part to move. And so what we've been seeing in just the last couple of months is foreign direct investment is now negative because people are realizing that you don't put your people at risk. You don't put your capital at risk in a system that now criminalizes due diligence. The story is in the process of turning. China has size, and that matters, but that's not the only factor. Now that we're losing those network effects, I think that the pace that we move out of China is going to be 3 and 4 times the pace that we moved into China. And to be perfectly blunt, it needs to be, because if we can't build out the industrial plant in North America before the Chinese system breaks, then we have to do it without Chinese gear. And that's going to make everything a lot more difficult and expensive.
So you believe the narrative of deglobalization and reshoring is going to happen, but because of economic necessity in some way, not because of a political disagreement with China?
The politics are not just a sideshow. That is very real. The national security side of this is relevant, but we've never, ever in human history seen a country face this sort of demographic collapse. Even if we decided to actively assist the Chinese in everything they do, this is still their last 10-year period.
So we talked about Putin being, what happens if his back is up against the wall? What about Xi?
Well, that's the problem. We don't know. There's this great story that I was told once that basically, you remember back in January, just before the Ukraine war started, when the United States was releasing this intelligence that not a lot of people believed about what the Russians had planned up to and including the day that the war was going to start. Well, it turns out that we had found a way to weasel our intelligence system into their secure rooms where were basically giant safes where there was no eavesdropping possible. There were no electronics, but we managed it anyway because Putin has an inner circle. Some of them are even competent. There's people he discusses things with. So there are phones you can tap, and there are faxes you can read and emails you can hack. And it turned out their information security was not as good as we thought it was. And so we just shared it with everybody. There's nothing like that in China. It's not because they have better IT protection. It's actually much worse than the Russians. But Xi doesn't speak with anyone. So there's nowhere you can go. There's no information you can get. There's no conversations you can listen into to find out what the Chinese are going to do because it's all in one guy's head. So the normal things that you would do indirectly is like, you look at the economic issues, you look at the military distribution, and you guess what someone in his position would do. None of that's relevant because we don't know what he knows. He's destroyed all the lines of information to himself and yet at the same time established himself as the only decision maker. You can't climb into someone's head when you don't know what they know. And so we're in a complete black box. All I can say is that because he has done this, the Chinese system is not functioning as you would expect a nation state to function, economically, strategically, in anything. And so we have been seeing ever more interesting policy failures across the system, whether it's in housing or in finance or in supply chains or in diplomacy. The whole thing is showing the early stages of system failure. And so that 10-year horizon I keep talking about, that's actually the best case scenario. That assumes you've got a government that's doing mitigation all the way down. And we don't have that right now.
So you're describing a situation where there's potential nation collapse in China.